Yes, I. This song is called Be the Change.
Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, freaks and geeks, damn, it is hot in here. Can you see the sweat on my face? Can you see my sweaty palms over here? What is it? It is like, it is 25 degrees here. It's very humid. It is the 31st of December, 2016, and I thought I would drop a podcast before the end of the year, before we go into 2017. I know I have been very slack on the podcast front, on the YouTube videos as of late. I've been focusing more on my music, and it's something that I'm going to be continuing to do. But every once in a while, I feel compelled to share my experience in regards to social justice, in regards to what's going on in the world. And I think the reason being is that I have this theory. That in life you have to find a balance between living for yourself and living for others, between serving and taking, whether that is taking in information, listening, as opposed to sharing information, putting out information, or whether that is living for yourself. Me. I'm a very type A kind of personality. I'm always doing stuff to serve me. But I also feel compelled to share, also to try to uplift the vibration of the planet, to sound very narcissistic and egotistical, but really I do think you have to find a balance. And essentially one of the reasons I love doing podcasts, I love sharing these videos, I love doing these podcasts, is one, I like the sound of my own voice. It gives me an opportunity when I listen to these podcasts to listen to my views, to really nut out what I think about things. And two, because if I am listening to too many documentaries, if I'm watching too many videos, I'm taking on all this information, but I'm not expressing my own views or addressing things that I don't agree with, I feel a little weird. I think it's important for us to share our views, and I think one of the best ways to arrive at truth. I mean, this podcast is all about philosophy. It's all about loving the truth, loving wisdom, and I think one of the best ways to do that is through spoken word, the live discipline of conversation. Now, I think we've all been very caught up in the world of reading information, which is fantastic, but assimilating information through words, through reading, has a limitation in that it's very static. It's very easy to have information conveyed the wrong way. And granted, this still happens through spoken word. One of the benefits of the oral tradition is that it is alive, and you have the opportunity right there and then to question someone's viewpoint, what someone has said to you. And I think that you can transmit a deeper level through word than you can, well, spoken word rather, than you can through written word. If someone says something to me, I also address how they're saying it, whether they believe what they're saying, and I get that in the vibration that they're emitting through their voice, whether they're saying that with confidence, which sometimes, in fairness, can be misleading, but there is an energetic quality to when something is said, and I think the best way to learn is through live information, through spoken word. That's one of the benefits of doing a podcast. You have the opportunity to listen to what I'm saying and to share your views, to respond to my views via YouTube. I will obviously share this on YouTube, and we can more effectively arrive at the truth. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into some topics, some areas that I have been thinking about lately in regards to social justice, morality, philosophy. These are areas that I've always been very fascinated in, and I think we should all be devoting time to if we want to improve this world. I think improvement starts with what lies within our noggins, what lies within our minds. As you think, so do you act. And as you act, that instills your character. It all starts with thoughts. And I find more often than not, this is the last preface before I go into some of these areas of topics. I find more often than not, I have far more issue with not what people are doing. I know it sounds weird, right? Because we live in a world of actions. It's like you should be far more frustrated with what someone is doing. But I find myself more frustrated with what people think, because I know ultimately that is where the problem lies, that will manifest itself in actions. And if I have a disagreement with someone, if I know that someone isn't just joking, someone truly believes that it's okay to, let's say, kill someone because of the color of their skin, or because they act a little differently to you, or has this idea that it's okay to do something they don't have a right to do because they're trying to create some kind of good. This consequentialist utilitarian attitude that a lot of people seem to subscribe to, that more often than not is what gets to me than the fact that someone is doing something that is wrong. However, they know that it is wrong, and therefore eventually they will change their ways because they're working towards changing themselves. And ultimately, we're all doing that. None of us is perfect. Ultimately, we are all caught up in this system, and in various ways we are all having a negative impact. But the fact that we're trying to uplift ourselves to a high level of awareness and conduct, that's what it's all about. And we do that by changing what lies in here, what lies within our heads. For those of you that are just listening to this podcast and can't see what I'm doing, pointing to my head over here, the noggin, the crown chakra. I mean, this is all about enlightenment, third eye. It's all about seeing beyond the veil, trying to see things for what they are. And if we have the right ideas within our mind, this will lift up our vibration, lift us to a high level of consciousness. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let's address some of the issues that I wanted to address. Now, I was watching a video some time back, and a philosopher, this guy was Stefan Molyneux, actually. I've been listening to a lot of his works. Amazing stuff. Highly recommend checking out his stuff, particularly in the realm of morality. I think he's one of the few people that has a real solid understanding of what morals are about. Morality, not this utilitarian, consequentialist, let me take your kidneys and use them to save thousands of people attitude that I think a lot of people have. These people that think they can see into the future. And I admire when someone speaks about morality in terms of principles, in terms of the universality of right and wrong, and it's something that he very much does. So I've been going through a lot of his videos, and whereas I've had issues with him in the past, because he seems always very argumentative, and it's funny, one of my friends was a big fan of his, and because I had an issue with him, I understood why I had the issue, because it was the fact that he subscribed to a lot of the views of Stefan Molyneux, and I guess that irritated me. Anyway, I digress. The point is, there was a time I wasn't a big fan of his work, but I've been listening to a lot of Stefan Molyneux's works lately in the realms of morality, and I find he has a fantastic understanding of this. And he was addressing a question one of his subscribers asked in regards to whether Hitler was responsible for killing millions. Now, this idea some people have that if I've been told to do something and I do that, I am no longer responsible for my actions, is one of the most pernicious ideas that has ever seeped itself into this Euclidean meat space reality. This is the concept of order following, as I've heard various people like Mark Passio refer to it as. This is the concept of abdicating responsibility. The idea that, oh, someone's told me to do so-and-so, therefore it's okay. So if I were to tell the one or two listeners that are listening to this right now to go out and smack some girl in the face because girls are girls and you can basically do whatever you want with them, and I have somehow convinced you guys that it is okay, and I'm going to take full responsibility. The idea that you are no longer responsible for that, and now I am the one that is responsible, is a really idea. I mean, let's be very clear about this. We all know it's wrong when we do something, even if it's at the behest of someone else. But the area of moral culpability is something that I find very few people understand well. Now, philosophically speaking, I've heard more often than not, I've read more often than not, that if you do something through someone else, it is almost as if you were doing that thing yourself. However, if you really analyze what is going on here, there is a science to this. There is someone that is actually more culpable. Just like if I told you listeners to go and do something that was wrong, I would be complicit and I would be morally culpable. Make no mistake about it. The person that is actually doing that action, the person that is actually going out and followed my advice, carried out my order, if there's anything such as an order, at the end of the day, if you're doing the action, you're the one that's responsible for it. The person that is actually doing that thing, that is manifesting that harm into the physical universe, is more to blame. And this is a concept I find 9 out of 10 people will not understand. People understand that they are morally culpable, but they don't understand how morally culpable they are. They've been programmed in this environment to think that if they're following orders, it's okay. And the reason this has come about is because of the military system. In order for the military to work, they've had to mind control the soldiers, mind control the people into thinking that they are no longer responsible for the actions that they are doing. And look, my father was a lieutenant commander in the Navy, and I remember him explaining to me the chain of command, why it's necessary, how if you have a situation where you don't have a hierarchy of command, you don't get things done. And granted, the military system is very effective. I could be wrong, but I believe it is very effective in getting things done. That's why we have the chain of command, if we're interested in doing what we need to do, putting aside morality. Absolutely. Follow orders. It's easier to delegate responsibility, to have someone from another part of the world tell someone to do something. And if people just follow what they're doing, it's easier to get things done. However, it is still someone's moral responsibility to do that which is right. Just because you've been told to do something and you are following that command does not make it right. And back to the science of moral culpability, the person that is actually manifesting the harm onto this physical world is the one that is by far more responsible. This is what most people lose sight of, and I cannot state this enough. If you do something through someone else, you don't somehow magically get abdicated responsibility. You cannot abdicate responsibility. You can't suddenly say, you know what, I'm dropping bombs on through drones on someone, but you know what? These lawyers now have I remember watching a video not long ago about how war is actually conducted at the behest of some lawyer. That, granted, these people are following orders. More often than not, the decision to bomb a particular target, an enemy combatant, as they say, is made by some lawyer that's trying to figure out whether or not they're going to be legally complicit in a wrongdoing. So imagine being in a situation where you're on some kind of computer and deciding whether or not you're going to drop a bomb on some suspected terrorist, and there's some lawyer deciding, well, you know what, this is okay, I'm going to give you the order to do that, and you know what, I'm going to take all responsibility for this. It's ridiculous. Now, of course, there is this high rate of people that are working in these environments, dropping bombs, using these drones, high rate of them leaving their jobs because they feel horrible about this. The idea that people have convinced themselves that, at least from a conscious level, that they're not responsible is one of the most pernicious ideas that we've ever seen in this world. It's what allows so many of the injustices to go on. People somehow think they're not responsible for doing horrible evils. And look, to address the whole question of whether or not Hitler was responsible for killing millions, of course he was responsible for inciting these people to commit these horrible crimes. I mean, in common law, if you do something, if you inspire someone to do something, rather, yes, you're still complicit. In fact, you're going to be prosecuted just the same as that person that did it. But what most people don't understand is that the person that actually did that violence, so all the millions of people that were following these ridiculous orders, even if it is through coercive violence, if someone is putting a gun to your head, and this is a difficult one for people to understand, just because you feel that your life is in threat, just because someone is coercing you to do something that is wrong, now that person that is coercing you to do that is still a wrongdoing. However, if you go out and do something that you don't have the right to do, well, the reality is you're the one that is doing the greater evil. I understand it's something that we don't want to accept, but you cannot do something just because you feel as if your life is a threat. At the end of the day, what you should do is defend yourself against the person that is doing the wrongdoing. If someone puts a gun to your head, well, you do what you need to do to disarm that person. But going ahead to do that evil just because you feel threatened, whether that is an imminent danger or whether that is a more subtle danger, you feel as if, unless of course you go out and join the military, you're not going to be able to provide for your children. At the end of the day, it is still a wrongdoing. And it all comes down to people needing to understand the idea of right and wrong, the nonviolence principle. Whether or not you want to accept that there are axiomatic principles, that there is a definitive universal idea of doing something that is wrong or doing something that is right. If you believe in fairness, if you believe in the universal preferable behavior principle, it's not even a principle, it's just this concept which is based off of logic and reasoning. If you don't want something done to you, then don't do it to other people. If you're in a situation where you have two thieves, now, we know stealing is wrong because that thief, even if he's wanting to steal from someone, he's not going to want that someone to steal from him. Now, unless, of course, you were happy having something done to you that you were doing to someone else, it's not valid. And for something to be a valid principle, it needs to be consistent. This is the thing about ethics. I mean, I always make a distinction between ethics and morality because ethics deals more with consistency. I mean, if you have this idea that it is okay for you to kill or rape people, then for that to be consistent, it should be okay for people to rape or kill you. Clearly though, people don't want to be raped. People don't want to have things stolen from them. If your ethic is that, this is actually very fascinating within the realms of ethics. If you are a thief that only steals from the rich, and you consistently steal from rich, and that is your ethic, then you may be more ethical within the defines of what ethics is, defining that as consistency, as a system that is consistent throughout. You may be more ethical than someone who says that he steals from the rich, but he also steals from the poor. I mean, if you were consistent with what you were saying, with your moral, with your principle, then that is what you call an ethical system. However, the idea of morality is more about right and wrong. It's not just about consistency. It's the idea that there is something that is definitively right or wrong, that is intrinsic by its very nature. Anyway, I realize that I'm going on a bit of a tangent over here, but once again, this is just an opportunity for me to express some of the ideas that I've been watching and I've been having personal conversations on. And I'm more than happy if guys or girls have any questions for me in regards to this stuff I'm talking about. I'm more than happy to address it. And I'm also happy to have you guys come up here and do a podcast with me over Skype if you'd like to do that. I don't know exactly when I have the time to do that, as I'm not going to be doing a podcast in a while. But yeah, if you want to debate this stuff with me, I'm more than happy to get into this conversation with you. But look, some other stuff I wanted to address was consent. One of my friends put up a statement on his Facebook just a while ago in regards to consent. It was in regards to an article he read about whether guys should explicitly ask a girl's permission before kissing her or engaging in any kind of sexual activity. And I thought to myself, well, here's an interesting thought. And it becomes a little tricky. Now, of course, all the feminists went crazy with this one. They said, of course, it's the guy's responsibility to ask permission before doing anything. I mean, but it comes down to this. There is something such as implicit contracts. And I think because of the fact that we all intuitively are connected, we all know when we have an understanding with someone. Of course, it's easy for us to pretend that we don't. But if I was in a situation with someone, and if you're in a situation where you're with a girl, it's pretty clear, I think, for the most part, unless, of course, you are a piece of shit, to know if she's probably comfortable with you making a move. Of course, we all take chances, but the fact that you have to take so many little steps before you kiss a girl, for instance, touching her or touching her hair, talking to her, which, of course, we don't ask permission for. Should I gain consent before I talk to someone? Should I gain consent before I touch someone on the arm or in the hair? Clearly not, but there is always an escalation. So before we get even to the point of kissing someone or having sex with them, we've gone through so many implicit agreements that it becomes, in my opinion, unnecessary to ask a girl, would it be okay if I was to have sexual intercourse with you, to stick my penis into your vagina?
Oh, well, since you asked so nicely, I'm going to have to say yes. Okay.
I mean, it just, I personally think it is unnecessary, and it basically kills the mood. And I actually got into a lot of trouble because all of these feminists were telling me that, look, it is wrong that you should gain consent, and the whole idea of consent is a very tricky thing. I mean, whether or not you're dealing with human rights or animal rights, clearly there are certain things that we need to gain consent for because we don't know if we have an agreement. Like, before you enter a contract with someone in regards to a job, obviously there are many things that you don't know. And whereas I understand we should be avoiding making assumptions, you have to make, when I use the word assumption, you have to have an understanding of what other people hold to be true. Otherwise, there's no point in doing anything. If I am in a store and I don't have an understanding, I don't have the assumption that it's wrong for me to take something from that store and not pay for it, and I just make the implicit assumption that it's okay for me to take something out of a store without paying for it. Clearly that's ridiculous, and clearly there is a distinction between doing that and making the assumption that if I am near a girl and I'm holding her and I'm touching her hand, that if I try to kiss her, I don't need to gain her permission to do that. And the greater fact that there are so many opportunities for a girl to say no. If someone says no in any moment, clearly that's all that's required. If I'm trying to do something and that person says no, I don't want to, then that's all that's required. I mean, merely someone has to say no, and that's all that is required to violate this implicit agreement that you may have. And I just think it becomes ridiculous when people want to start gaining consent for everything. And the reality is, if you don't want to do something, express it. I mean, people are going to make all kinds of assumptions, but you have the power within yourself to say no at any time. Unless, of course, you use that word and say no. You're going to be at the mercy of people taking advantage of you all the time. But let's make it very clear. People should not initiate violence. People should not be forcing anyone to do anything they don't want to do. As soon as someone says they don't want to do something and they haven't initiated any wrongdoing, it's their right to reject that. I just think the issue of consent is a much more complicated thing than it has to be. I think there are certain things without a doubt that we all have implicit contracts in regards to. And I think when people want to express everything in terms of yes or no, it becomes a little ridiculous. And for instance, in regards to animal rights, one of the issues I've always had is when people say that you can't gain consent from animals. Well, of course you can't gain consent from a verbal level, but we have an understanding of when something is not okay with an animal. That's why many of us understand that it's wrong to kill animals, because we intrinsically, intuitively know that no animal wants to die. But in regards to things like milking a cow, the act of just milking a cow, or using the eggs of a chicken, we intuitively understand that that causes that animal no harm. And if we truly felt as if that was wrong, then we wouldn't do it. Of course, if you want to make the assumption that unless, of course, you gain explicit consent from an animal, which is impossible, you obviously can't do that, then you should not try to do anything. You realistically, if you want to take this to the utmost extreme level, you should not be having pets because you haven't gained their explicit consent. You haven't asked that dog if it wants to be with you, even though you know that it wants to be with you. It just requires a bit of intuition. It reaches a point where you cannot express everything within terms of human consent. There requires some intuitive understanding, some assumption that you have to make on some level. And you're just being a douchebag if you want to pretend that it's okay to rape someone or rape an animal when you know it doesn't want to be raped. But of course, if you have an intuitive understanding of what that animal wants, you don't do things that are not in its interest. I really don't think I need to express this stuff. I think most of us are sensitive enough to understand when we're doing something that is wrong because it doesn't resonate with us. So look, that's something that I wanted to talk about, just the whole issue of consent. Now, look, back to the whole morality thing. I wanted to talk about some of the issues I think people have with the whole idea of natural law, libertarianism, the nonviolence principle versus self-defense. A lot of issues that I find people that are caught up with the whole consequentialist ideology tend to express. This has come through in conversations I've had with people. First and foremost, what constitutes violence? I'm going to start off by defining what violence is, at least what I understand of violence, and what most of us understand of violence. However, most of us have decided to change the definition. Now, I would define violence as a violation, the initiation of force in order to do something. Now, obviously, if you hit someone, that's violence. You've initiated force. If you rape someone, once again, obviously, you violated them using force. Theft, I think, is also a great way of defining it. I mean, essentially, you could define force, initiation of force, as a form of theft. I mean, you're taking away someone's health if you hit them. You're taking away someone's physical. If you steal from someone, it's obviously theft. You're taking an item of their property. So, another way of looking at it is in regards to security. A lot of people like to say that if you're taking away someone's security, it's still theft. But I think that's a great way of looking at when you were violating someone, looking at it in terms of theft. So I essentially refer to violence as either one, taking away something that is not yours, be that their health, be that their security, be that their property, or the initiation of force. Now, the problem arises when people want to start defining violence as everything. So, emotional violence. This is the classic argument a lot of bleeding heart liberals like to make, that you've hurt someone's feelings, therefore it's violence. I got into a conversation with a girl that I'm seeing a while back that if I say something to someone, for instance, if I am a comedian and I'm making a joke about rape, and I think it's funny, and everyone starts laughing, and everyone knows it's not everyone fair enough knows it's a joke, but it's still not appropriate. I am potentially harming someone. I may be upsetting someone. I may be emotionally upsetting them. Therefore, it's a form of violence. Now, emotional violence does not constitute real violence. One, because there's nothing physical about it. And granted, I know a lot of people say that, if you tell a lie to someone, that's not physical, but that's a little different in that if you're committing fraud, you're obviously doing something. Lying is a little tricky because you're doing something that is potentially going to cause harm. But in regards to violence, like true violence, we're looking at physical violence, not emotional violence. Therefore, let's take away, I mean, whereas I would put fraud in there, and I'm happy to go into that in a bit more detail, let's just have a look at the distinction between emotional violence and physical violence. One is dealing with potentialities. If I tell you that I'm breaking up with you, that may potentially hurt you. That may lead to you committing some kind of harm on yourself. And of course, a lot of people would look at me as being the instigator of that harm. Obviously, I caused it, and they look at things purely within the realms of cause and effect. Now, this is a very, very important point I want to make to people, because a lot of people, I think, get lost in this. There is a difference between responsibility and cause. Just because you cause something does not mean you're responsible. It's like, whoa, what are you saying? Just because if you cause something, you're responsible? No. Whereas in the realm of common law, that may apply. In the realm of natural law, like real natural law, you have to make a distinction between responsibility and cause, because essentially we are all connected. You pull on one string in nature and you are pulling on everything. If I tell you you're an idiot, or better yet, if I fart and you smelt that and you were so disgusted by that you decided to leave this house and then you got run over by a car, I have effectively caused that according to your logic. No, I am not responsible for that. I'm responsible for my action, granted. But you are responsible, or the driver that ran into you, whether that was conscious or unconscious, they're responsible for that action. Just because you do something that leads to something else does not always mean you were responsible for that. You were responsible for your physical actions. You are not always responsible for the consequences of your actions. Because if you follow this within the lines of cause and effect, everything is connected. We are all responsible within varying degrees for everything that goes on in the world. Therefore, if I fart or if I tell someone something, it's my opinion, it may very well be true, and it leads them to doing something that is horrible or affects them to some extent, then I'm responsible for that. But the reality is I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for my own actions. There is a distinction between responsibility and cause and effect. And when I'm talking about harming someone, I'm talking about physical actions, violence, true violation, raping someone, hitting someone, taking away something that which is not yours. As soon as you bring emotional harm into the picture, oh, you hurt my feelings, oh, you said something to me that I don't like, that's reality. That's very different. The problem arises because people look at anything that is harmful as being violence. No, there is a distinction between harm, things that happen just because of the state of nature. For instance, you being sunburnt. I mean, that is through no fault of anyone else's, but just the reality, nature. Another classic example of the stupidity of some people in regards to violence is structural violence. Now, this is a term that has been taking on a lot more use, I'd say, over the last 10 or so years. It's something that I find is related to communism, because ultimately they're trying to avoid any kind of harm that manifests itself in the world. Structural violence is the idea that society can be set up in a particular way where it is being detrimental to the poor, or it is causing harm. Therefore, you have a look at poverty. That is a form of structural violence. The fact that there are people, due to the way the financial system has been set up, that are not benefiting from it and therefore don't have money. Scarcity is unfortunately a factor of this physical world that we are immersed in. There are always going to be winners and losers to some extent. If I run a race and there can only be one winner and everyone else is a loser, now, through no fault of my own, well, granted, I have obviously won the race, but that is not violating anyone. If I win the race and therefore someone else loses, that is not violence. That is the reality. That is unfortunately just what happens. If someone is poor because they don't work hard enough, they're not born with the right knowledge, or they haven't gone about teaching themselves or developing the necessary skills in order to become more self-sufficient, it is unfortunate, and yes, it is harmful, but that is not true violence. Violence constitutes a violation. And the problem more often than not is that people want to lump things that they see in nature as being violent. So, oh, this person is suffering over here because he can't pay his bills. And you got into a contract, some kind of credit card contract, and he agreed to it at the time, and now he's not able to pay it. Oh, this is structural violence, and now because you're not helping this person, you're somehow adding to this violence, therefore that's real violence. No, that's not violence. This is one of the biggest problems, because as soon as you say that this is violence, even though it's not, all people are doing is just putting the word violence after the word structural and saying that this is a form of violence. As soon as you will allow that, all you have to do is say that because you are contributing to this, it's real violence. If I'm contributing to someone's state of financial unhappiness or inability to make money for themselves, for instance, if I tell someone, hey, you should be spending more time playing with me as opposed to going out and working, I'm contributing to their structural violence in a way. Well, not structural violence per se, but I'm contributing to their financial state. Well, first of all, it's a choice. I'm not applying any physical force. It's still their choice. If you consent to doing something, as difficult as it may be for people to accept, it's your responsibility. It all comes down to personal freedom, personal choice. The other problem I find is passive violence, which is something I've spoken about and is one of the most difficult things. This idea that because you are not helping someone through inaction, you are contributing to someone's unfortunate state. You are now complicit. Now, this becomes an issue. This is a little different to a violation as such. Because, granted, I would say, in my opinion, it is a moral issue in the fact that it's not strictly a moral issue. It is what I would call an issue of you being a douchebag. If you have millions and millions of dollars and you want to focus your time on yourself, yeah, you're a douchebag. I mean, a lot of people refer to that as Satanism in the extreme. It is a form of selfishness where it is becoming, it is borderline immoral. However, it is still your right to do that. And when I say right, this is another thing I want to address. I'm speaking about you are not violating anyone. You're not violating the nonviolence principle, which is very different from this concept of rights that people have. This idea that if the state has given you a right to rape people, it somehow becomes a right. Rights are, at least from the perspective of good and bad, right and wrong, violation. It is something that is inherent within this reality. It's not from the perspective of, something that has been given to you. It is something that simply exists, just like gravity exists, just like 1 + 1 = 2, or the concept of numbers. I mean, granted, it's not something that you can identify as an object in this physical space. It's something that exists. Just because someone doesn't believe in the concept of numbers, because someone doesn't believe in the concept of gravity, it doesn't somehow cease to exist. It still exists. Everyone wants to refer to everything as a construct. No, not everything is a construct. There are certain things that are based off of reality, sound reasoning, and logic. And in regards to rights, I know I'm going a little off tangent over here. Rights are something that are inherent. Rights, from the definition of something that is in violation of the nonviolence principle, something that you do not have the right to do, and you are doing, that is something that is a wrong. If you are doing something that harms no one, that is part of your own being. If you decide to pleasure yourself, if you decide to do what you will with your own physical property, if you decide to take something that is yours, that is a right. If you decide to do something that involves only you, it is not causing to harm someone else. And I'm talking about physical things. I'm not talking about emotional violence. That is your right. And when I speak about right and wrong, I'm speaking about rights. I basically interchange the word because if something is your right, it means that it is right. It causes no harm, and it is inalienably your right. If something is not a right, it is wrong. It is something that you are doing that is violating someone else's right. It is in violation of the nonviolence principle. Man, I am really becoming verbose with the explanations I'm giving, so I'm going to try to be a bit more succinct. I realize I've gone a little off par from what I was discussing. What was I discussing? The distinction between causality and responsibility, covered that. Just because you do something that may inevitably lead to causing someone to be unhappy and then do something that is wrong, there is a distinction between those two things. You need to have a separation between responsibility and causality, because people are responsible for their own actions. This is why we do not allow emotional violence into the picture. If you say something that upsets someone and they go about and do something that's horrible, and you acted as the catalyst in bringing that about, you are not, within the realms of natural law, responsible for that action, because ultimately it is their responsibility. They are the ones that have actually taken upon that action to bring about that result. And most people that understand this, they intuitively understand what I'm talking about. The people that don't, that want to get caught up with the words that I'm using, they'll always have some kind of disagreement, because essentially I'm using words to express reality, and as soon as you do that, there's always going to be some kind of disconnect. But there is a universality of right and wrong. We know when we're doing something that is our responsibility. And granted, I believe that by using reason and logic, you can express this to a very, very high level as to what is right and what is wrong. Ultimately, it comes down to the golden rule. If you truly feel bad about what you're doing, chances are you should not be doing it. And if you've done something that makes you feel horrible, chances are it is your responsibility. It was your responsibility, and yes, you were morally culpable in that. But these are just universal intuitions that I think we all have access to. Let's talk about some other stuff. I want to talk about the whole concept of God. I got into an argument not long ago in regards to free will and determinism. Now, the philosophical standpoint, I read this, some time back when I was a kid. This is the one thing that made me question the whole idea of God. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I absolutely believe in the concept of God. I believe in not the Judeo-Christian idea of God, that God is this personal God up in the sky that controls your life, that wants to know everything that you have done and makes changes in order to influence you. I look at it in the same way that the Founding Fathers looked at it, the idea of deism, that there are principles, there are rules governing this reality that we are immersed in. Whether you want to refer to that as the unifying field, God, Allah, Buddha, it doesn't matter. But there is definitely some principle that we refer to as life, something that is causing the tree to grow. Obviously, the flowers to blossom. That is the underlying factor in allowing things to matriculate to high levels of consciousness. That it's not some random occurrence. That there is such a precise nature, and that is a very appropriate word. There is such a precise principle, nature from the word nater, the underlying principle. There is such a precise principle to how things work in this reality, whether it's the four forces that govern this physical world, this universe, the strong force, the weak force, electromagnetism, gravity. They're at such a precise principle. They're wired in such a precise way. If you have a look at the formulas for how these things work within reality, they're of such a precise order that, from my understanding, which is very limited from a scientific perspective, of how this reality is able to hold together, if they were even just off by a nano element, if you'll allow me to use that as a measurement, just to address the precise nature of this world that we're immersed in. These principles, these things, whether it's gravity, whether it's the strong force, the weak force, they're at such a precise level that if they were off by just a fraction, the world wouldn't be the way it is. But there is definitely an order. If you have a look at the Fibonacci sequence, you have a look at a Mandelbrot set, this amazing thing that is found within nature, I understand, that shows how in any part you will find the entire whole. But there is definitely a principle governing the way in which we experience this reality. And that principle is God. That's very different to this idea that you find within Judeo-Christian religions, that God is watching over everything that you do. Now, I understand a lot of the atheists, they tend to buy into this. I would say that the distinction I have, I don't call myself an atheist, even though a lot of people look at the things that I say as being atheistic. I believe in science. I believe in philosophy. I believe in trying to understand this physical universe. I believe in principles. However, I also believe that there are things that I do not understand. In my humility, I understand because of the experiences that I have had and the knowledge that I have been immersed in from a young age. I, without a doubt, know that there are many hidden sciences that we don't understand. And people look at a lot of the things that go on as not being within the realm of science, therefore not being real. A lot of the atheists have this narrow-minded attitude where if there is something that has not been accepted by the scientific faculty, it cannot be real. Because I have an understanding that there are things that I do not know, and there's an explanation for all of these things, I often speak about things that a lot of people would refer to as being spiritual or metaphysical in nature, but essentially are sciences that we do not understand, dealing with consciousness, dealing with mentalism, dealing with how we are affected by things outside of this physical reality. And because I have an understanding of this within the realm of the occult, within the realm of esoteric knowledge, I also include these things in my worldview. And I call that spirituality. There is no distinction between spirituality, between science. Whereas I'm not a fan of religion in the sense that religions, from the word relegare, to bind back, to hold back, they indoctrinate people into a mindset, and it takes away this inquisitive nature that is inherent within us to question things, to be constantly redefining our default position on reality. I think as soon as you have this mindset that you have all the answers, you are not willing to grow, you're not willing to question these things, that's what creates so many of the problems that you see within religion. I don't believe in dogmas. I believe in science. I believe in reason. I believe in logic. I believe in empiricism, to try to understand this universe in all its complexities. wherever that may take me. However, because I understand that there are things that I do not understand, and if you follow history, you realize that we are constantly rising in our understanding of things. Some years back, we thought that we had this Newtonian definitive understanding of the world, and then quantum mechanics, it blows everything out of the water. And because I understand that in the past, there were many great leaders that understood many of the things that I speak about, that I've learned from, whether that was the understanding of the metaphysical world to sciences dealing with the physical world that we just haven't understood. I also understand that there are many things beyond the scientific understanding, the hermetical sciences that you can see. So look, that's my idea on my view on religion. I'm not sure how I got into that, but I was talking about God, and what I wanted to address was that a lot of people in religion, they believe in this idea that God is all-powerful, omniscient. What do they say? He's omniscient, he's omnipotent, so all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing. And he's also all-loving. From a philosophical standpoint, if we look at God from this personalized mindset, that God is obviously someone like us, however, has these incredible abilities. And I say someone like us in that, from the Christian mindset, God created human beings in his own image, etc., etc. However, he is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving. Philosophically, this poses problems because, without a doubt, we see many evils in this world. And if God is willing to allow these things to happen, it poses a problem. Of course, we address this theologically speaking by saying that because God brings about the concept of free will, granted he is all-powerful, because he has wanted to have free will in the equation, he has allowed free will. Therefore, we make these choices that bring about harm, that bring about evil in the world, and that is the consequence of having free will. I mean, the sheer fact that there is a choice to do good and evil, which God has allowed, that's what creates all the problems in the world. However, it still poses problems, because if God was all-powerful and he still allowed free will, at the end of the day, fair enough, there is free will, but he would still have the power to prevent the evils from manifesting. So God has allowed you to do what you will, but as soon as you do an evil action, if God was all-powerful and all-loving, logic would dictate that he would prevent that evil from manifesting. The sheer fact that he does not would mean that he's either not all-powerful, in that he does not have the ability to prevent these evils from manifesting even though he's allowed free will into the equation, or he is not all-loving, in that he has the power to prevent these evils from manifesting, but he chooses not to do so because he doesn't care. He's got better things to do. He wants to focus on his other universes and have fun there. So essentially, that is the philosophical dilemma. Therefore, in my mindset, because I do also believe in logic and reasoning as well as also look at things intuitively, there has to be one. I choose to believe that God, of course, does exist within the realm of principles. However, I choose to believe that God is all-loving. I look at God as love. That's an intuitive assessment. It is not necessarily, it's not based off of reason and logic. I have the integrity to say that, but it is something I choose to believe. And it's either one or the other. I choose to believe that God is all-loving. Now, because he cannot be all-loving and all-powerful, because if he was all-loving and all-powerful, he would not allow the evils in the world. Of course, he is simply all-loving, but not all-powerful. Of course, you could go the all-powerful card, but in that case, he would not be all-loving. And why would you want to look up to a God? Why would we have reverence for a deity or some kind of force, principle, nature, if it was not good? I believe that truth is good. I believe that God must be good. Therefore, I choose to believe that God is obviously all-loving. Anyway, this is me ranting on some issues that have been simmering around my mind. I know that I probably glossed over a lot of this stuff, but this is what I do. I like to have conversations with myself, and doing a podcast is an opportunity to express the ideas that are simmering around in my mind. And if people are crazy enough to listen to these thoughts and benefit from it, that's great. That's great. But I want to stress that a lot of the issues that I have when I'm having these conversations with people arise from people defining things differently. I think I mentioned this earlier as I was breaking down some of the things I was talking about, that I want to talk about the way in which I define things. Because as Dao Zhu said, wisdom begins with defining things correctly, with using words in their right meaning. And more often than not, many of the arguments that we have arise because we don't look at things the same way as far as our understanding of the words that we're using. That's why in philosophy, or at least within the Plato's Republic, one of the things they speak about is when you are having a dialectic, when you are engaged in a conversation with someone, you define what you were talking about. And one of the biggest misconceptions I find when people are speaking about, one, government or anarchy, right? This is something that I believe in. I believe in the concept of libertarianism. I believe in the concept, which really isn't a concept. I was a libertarian even before I knew what it was. I think it was something that I didn't start calling myself till maybe 7 years prior, when I had a conversation with someone and I could never express my beliefs within the same principle, doctrine that this guy was expressing it in. But everything that he's saying made perfect logical sense, that you don't have the right to kill people, to violate people for any reason whatsoever. It's just something that we do because we want certain results. It was speaking about the concept of how the government essentially, through coercive violence, is taxing people. Is telling them that, look, we're going to use your money and give it to the rich, to give it to the poor. We're going to use it to go about and make the world a better place. Therefore, we're going to steal something from you and use it to do good, which is not right. So the whole libertarian ideal is based off of this idea that provided you are not initiating violence, you have a right to do what the hell you want. People don't have the right to take something from you in order to do good, which is a universal understanding. I mean, everyone that is a human being does not want someone stealing their kidney and using it to save the world. I mean, you may want that, but I think in fairness, you'd have to agree that is wrong. That's something that we do, but it's not fair. It's not right. It's not moral. And this idea of doing it to bring about more good, like we're some kind of psychic, omniscient being, and we know exactly what our consequences are, the consequences to every action. Even if that was so, if I knew that by killing a baby and using its kidneys and its organs to save thousands of people was a sure fact, it's still a violation. It's still something that I'm doing that is wrong, but I'm doing because I want to bring about more good. That is not right. That's not what morality is about. Morality is about principles. And this is what I want to get down to. Morality, at least from a philosophical concept, like in its truest nature, if you believe that morality is about morals, principles, that which are good, not this airy-fairy, look, I can do what I want as long as I believe it'll bring about the most amount of good. It is about principles, that which comes first. If you are violating those things in order to bring about more good, that's not a moral. That's not what morality is about. That's about the best amount of good in your opinion. Good for your people, your family, your race. That's about risk management. And granted, I understand that there are other factors like security. Obviously, it does become a moral issue, in my opinion. But I don't like referring to it as morality. It's something else. You're being a douchebag and you're being careless. And in common law, we punish people that behave carelessly because you're being a douchebag. However, it's different to morals. Therefore, if I was endangering someone's life, a lot of people see gun activists as being careless and dangerous because they're using guns. Guns in of themselves are not violent. They're simply used for protection. This is the problem, people see a gun and they see violence when they should be seeing protection. When you have people with more guns, if you have the people in higher positions of power, like security guards, the military having guns, well, if the majority of the public, normal public, does not have guns, that's a serious issue. Obviously, if you see them having guns and you see the majority of the public not having guns, that is an unsafe situation. But if you see everyone having guns, that becomes more an issue of protection, more an issue of, oh, now I actually have the ability to defend myself. Whenever you have this unbalance, though, if you see, this is something I heard Stefan Molyneux speak about, which made a lot of sense. People that are actually against gun rights are actually for violence and guns, in a way. In that people that are against guns are not against guns, they're against normal people having access to guns. So people, normal citizens that want to go about protecting themselves from the government if that situation arose, they're against that, but they're all for people within the military, people within these positions of higher authority having access to these guns because they're responsible people. Now, in a situation like that, one, that's not fair. You can't violate someone's right to have a gun if they're not initiating violence. That's just common sense. What you're doing is you're saying, oh, I'm scared of what you might do, therefore I'm going to take away something that is not yours. Can you imagine if it was a situation where someone wanted to take away your penis because they were afraid of being raped, because they've been raped in the past? They saw you as a guy and some kind of black guy.
I don't trust you, black people. You got big dicks, and you're gonna rape us. So I don't want you to have a penis.
And with that logic said, I'm going to enact laws now, and you have to have your penis cut off before you hit the age of 10. Now, of course, they could have the argument that, look, they've statistically found that people that have penises and are black tend to have more sex, and sometimes there's rape involved. Therefore, with that argument, it now becomes acceptable. You see, this kind of thinking is not morality. This is what I'm trying to get across. It is consequentialist thought. It's things that we do in order to protect ourselves. But as I always say, as Benjamin Franklin said, those that are willing to compromise their freedom for security deserve neither freedom. Finish this for me. Please finish this for me. If you don't know this, then you really need to start reading, because it is the situation that we are currently immersed in. People do not understand that this has happened time and time again throughout history. People are scared. We're fearful by nature. We start thinking about the future. We start looking at the past, seeing what has happened, and try to make changes in order to bring about a positive future. The problem arises when we're willing to violate things that we don't have the right to do in order to bring about that positive future. I got into a conversation with a prison guard about this particular issue, and he brought up the same thing, that eventually we had the same understanding of terms, so we arrived at the real definition of words, which was fantastic. I was like, finally, you know what I'm talking about when I'm speaking about right and wrong. You understand what you're talking about is about best case scenarios. It's not morality, it's about what you want. And finally said, yeah, I'm happy with that. I don't have a problem with the government taking some of the rights of people in order to protect our future. And that's where I have to be completely honest with you, from a very humanitarian level, or human level rather, I understand that. I want safety. I think there's nothing wrong with people wanting to be secure. And whereas we understand that if it was something like our physical body, and someone was saying that they had a right to take away our arm, take away our penis, take away our eyes in order to serve other people that were more needing of those vital organs, so they can do far more good. And you have to think about the greatest amount of people, not just the one. Sacrifice the few for the many, the glory of Rome. I think a lot of us would instinctively feel that's not. I don't want that. I don't want someone taking my penis and helping thousands of other black people. I need my penis, damn it. I want to fuck. Fuck you all for wanting to use my penis, exploit it. However, when it comes to things like property, when it comes to an extension of ourselves, for instance, our inalienable rights, and when I speak about rights, once again, I want people to understand, I'm not speaking about things that are man-made. A lot of people, I know I'm digressing a little, but a lot of people want to start naming everything as a right, like, my happiness is a right. Now, it's my right to be happy. That's not a right. That's something else. That is this new age attitude of what a right is. When I speak of right, I'm speaking about right in terms of correct. What is correct? That is how I am defining a right, and that's how I'm going to use it. And if you're going to make any arguments, I want you to have my understanding of what a right is. I'm not speaking about the what I call the Stefan Molyneux approach to rights. Stefan Molyneux is one of these guys, and I've recently been watching his videos, that doesn't believe in the concept of rights. And I'm cool with his understanding of it, because he defines rights differently to me. His understanding of rights, at least the way in which most people use it, is this attitude where people start defining not just inalienable rights, the rights that are along the lines of you own your body yourself, or right along the lines of you don't have a right, something that causes no harm, that is intrinsically your right, but rights along the lines of, oh, wait a sec, it's my right to have social welfare. It's my right to have rich people pay me money. A lot of people say they're rights. Now, they're not rights. Rights are things that were arrived at. They weren't, of course, conjured up out of nothing. They existed, but we started making reference to in order to protect people. It's this shield attitude where it's something that is yours, that is intrinsically, by very nature, yours. Not this attitude where we start claiming rights as things that we're taking. It's a very different attitude where you start saying, oh, let me get this right from the government, something I don't have a right to, something along the lines of welfare, or something that is going to make me feel better that is not actually mine, something that is wrong, and then start calling it a right. This is what people do. They start changing the definitions of words. They start calling things rights that are not rights, that are wrongs. They start calling things violence, like structural violence and passive violence, which are strictly not violence per se, and then start saying, well, because this is a form of violence, what you're doing is still wrong, or start saying that, well, rights are obviously something that you cannot definitively prove. And this is where the problem arises. It always comes down to defining things correctly. So look, I've defined morality, I've defined what rights actually are, and look, this is going to be the last thing I speak about, because when people are trying to understand libertarianism, which is something that I'm becoming a lot more familiar with, it's something I never fully embraced because I never fully understood the whole idea of how tax was wrong, but essentially when you look at violence along the lines of people taking something that's not yours through coercion, saying, look, I want you to give me your money so I can do good in the world, and if you don't, and this is what coercive violence is, it's at the threat of a gun. I'm going to blow your brains out unless you do that. Yes, that is violence. That is contingent on you manifesting physical harm, on using force. That is violence. It's the initiation of force. Well, coercive violence, which is obviously contingent on the initiation of violence. Anyway, in regards to libertarianism, in regards to the fundamental idea of that, it's derived from the word anarchy. At least this is how I look at it. A lot of people look at the word anarchy and they think chaos. They think craziness. They think no laws, no rules, no regulations. That may be the definition that we've seen come about now, because unfortunately words are always changing, but for someone like me that believes in the etymology of words and tracing it to the original meaning, I go by the idea that if you really want to understand a word, if we're going to have this mutual understanding of what a word means, we have to use the original meaning. Because if people just change words here and there, and some of us change the meaning or have a different meaning of it because it's been changed, and some of us are using the older meaning, there's this disconnect in regards to a mutual understanding of what a word means. Therefore, the best way to have a clear understanding of a word is to make the agreement, and this is the most logical, sane thing to do, that the word should be the original meaning. If I come up with a word like salamucho, and I say that means you like to have sex with goats, that's what it means. Salamucho means you like to have sex with goats. I don't care if 2 years later someone decides to change the meaning and say it means you like to have sex with goats and cows. If they do that and everyone starts using the word salamucho to refer to people who like to have sex with goats and cows, that's the incorrect meaning. It is the person that originally came up with the word. And that's the most logical thing to do. So when I'm speaking about the definition of the word anarchy, if you follow the etymology, and granted I could be wrong about the original meaning, but I do not believe I am, if you follow the etymology, you will find that we're referring to an, which is the opposite. That's basically a word that implies the opposite. And let me break down that word. So we got anarchy. Archon is the other word related to that, and that basically means rulers. So if you put an in front of archon, it basically means no rulers. You are creating a situation with the word anarchy where you are free from rulers, you are free from government, you are free from people telling you what to do or forcing you to do things that you have a right not to do. That's essentially what anarchy means. It is a system of no rulers, no archons. And archons, I mean, look, when you actually hear the word archon, it doesn't have this, you see archon as being more of a bad thing. Because I think instinctively, if you hear the word anarchy, I could be wrong, but instinctively, when I would hear that word anarchy, I think it was a negative word. You know what I mean? I think if people said, just use the word archon, like a way referring to anarchy, they just said, oh, you're one of those archon people, you would think of the word archon in a negative light, right? But obviously with the word anarchy, it doesn't have that same kind of clarity. I think most of us immediately assume that archon is something of a negative word, has a negative connotation, but anarchy becomes a little bit more confusing. Anarchy. But look, that's irrelevant. The bottom line is people have a different understanding of what these words mean. But if you actually break it down, you realize that the word anarchy is actually a good thing. Here, this is what I was trying to explain before. Essentially, if you just had the word archon, people would think of that as being a bad word. But because you put an in front of it, it becomes a good thing. It's saying no archons. It's just like the word. It's just if we simply had the word archon, we weren't using an over, people would understand that is a bad thing. But because we have put the word an in front of archon, and most people don't know that an is basically opposite. You're taking a word and inverting it. So now it's actually a good thing. It means no archons. Yeah, if people looked at it like that, they'd realize that the word anarchy is actually a good word. Anyway, I know I've become a little ambivalent in my explanations over here, but I'm basically extemporaneously trying to understand this thing as I'm talking. I wanted to have a very off-the-cuff podcast and talk about a lot of the things that I've been going through, a lot of the conversations I've been having over the last year. And I hope you guys have gotten some kind of enjoyment out of this if you're still listening to this. Let us know what you disagree with. Let us know what you don't resonate with. At some point, I would be open to having perhaps a podcast discussing these ideas, but only if you have somewhat of an understanding about this stuff. I don't want to be speaking to people that have a completely erroneous notion about everything. That does more harm than good, and I feel as if that's a waste of my time. Obviously, that's a very subjective thing, but if you're someone that is really interested in philosophy, you're obviously well read, and you want to have a civil conversation about these issues, I might be open to discussing this with you. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and until next time, leave some comments. And check out my fan page, The Christian Journey. Boom shakalaka. This will be the last podcast that I do for some time, I would imagine, unless, of course, I decide to engage you guys in a live podcast over Skype, discussing perhaps some of these issues. Until next time, peace out, keep it real, don't drive and text. This is Chris Schul. Ow!
Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water,
our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we
All
are
matter
powerful
is
beyond
ultimately
measure.
quantum energy that originates from another